Chaos at Nintendo. Guys, the tariffs are affecting things, and while us WoW players aren't too worried about how tariffs are going to affect WoW because there isn't really any solid product crossing borders there, it will affect things like PC parts and stuff. We're talking about graphics cards, keyboards, the new Nintendo Switch, if you were planning on getting that. Yeah, the hardware side of things is what's really going to see a price increase because of these tariffs. And it looks like right now, between China and the U.S., those things are just going higher and higher and higher. Pretty soon we're going to be at over 9,000. Right, tariffs on each other. So let's see here. Bellular has an insider that Nintendo is experiencing the worst case scenario. Let's see what's going on.
There's no better way to start this episode than with a quote, so here it is. I don't want to blow things out of proportion, but this feels like a true crisis moment for Nintendo. Those are the words of former PR manager for Nintendo of America, Kit Ellis, talking about the backlash to the Switch 2. And it's fair to say there has been a lot of backlash out there. This was Nintendo's golden opportunity.
Yeah, well, you see, this dropped the price. Jesus Christ. Oh my God. That's it. I'm dead. I'm dead because that just fucking gave me a heart attack. Fuck you, Burning Viking, for popping that blurb just now. The drop the price spamming that you see right here going down, this thing was going on because people, the $90, was it $90 for the games? Or the $80 reveal for the games that they dropped. So yeah, the games were very expensive for the Switch 2 specifically, and that's what this drop the price spam was going down when Nintendo was revealing everything.
Take the insane success of the Switch to present the future and to lock in their dominance. Now you've got people talking about the Wii U. You've got people talking about pricing, about things that feel a little hostile to the consumer. So this is not what Nintendo wanted, and things could get worse before they get better. But that, of course, is only if you can even pre-order a console, which many...
Ooh. So here's the thing, too, before he gets into this. I am happy with the backlash because the entire games industry is watching what's happening. And when Nintendo launched their new console and they talked about the game prices being higher, significantly higher than they've been in the past, there was a lot of backlash to it. And that's good because everyone's watching. And trust me, if somebody can get away with hiring the price of games, everybody's going to hire the price of games. So don't forget, game consumers out there, you speak with your wallet. You don't participate in this shit if you don't like what they're charging you, right? And that'll keep prices down, hopefully, because they can't charge something if nobody's going to buy it.
Many of you can't. Spicy news first. So Nintendo have indefinitely delayed Switch 2 pre-orders in the USA and Canada, and that's explicitly because of the tariffs. My Nintendo members are going to get invites from May 8th, but as for everyone else, well, literally no clue. According to Doug Bowser, who's of course CEO of Nintendo of America, the tariff costs were not...
Wait a minute. Oh my God. I thought the CEO's last name was Bowser. It is Bowser? The guys, how is Bowser the CEO of Nintendo? Is this a fucking meme or is this real? This guy changed his last name when he became CEO? What the hell? That's pretty amazing, actually. Nintendo of America President Doug Bowser says that tariffs did not directly impact the console's original price tag. Put in the April 2nd announcement. Any previous tariffs were not factored into the price itself. He explained that speaking to me the day after the event. So tariffs aren't affecting it just yet. But I've heard, like, for other products, vehicles and shit around here in Detroit, it could be like there's an 8-month delay-ish to seeing tariffs actually come into effect. So they've already made some of these. Probably there aren't tariffs involved in those, but there will be down the line.
Factored into the pricing of the console. That is what he said, but according to analysts, that's likely just some PR spin.
I didn't, Brad.
If you want evidence, you only have to look at, well, the Japan locked Switch, because it has been priced more cheaply. This really is quite something. Now, that is when tariffs would have been a comparatively minor impact. Now they're, quote, something we have to address, and that may not just be a delay. So to get into the tariffs, Chinese Switch 2s, again, that's if these tariffs actually do end up fully being implemented at the full amount, which is, well,
that's still
knows,
up for debate too.
But the Chinese Switch 2s could have an import tariff.
Right now, if you don't know, they're posturing, they're going back and forth. Trump is saying, okay, you raise tariffs, now I'm going to this number. And then China does the same thing back, and we got the back and forth between the two. But nothing's actually happened yet. These are like numbers that they're fighting back and forth. They're laying their dicks on the table, trying to do a measuring contest. But nobody knows if the measurements are real yet, right? Nobody knows if the ruler is accurate. Because we don't know if that shit's actually going to happen. All we know is that they're yelling back and forth, and these are going to be implemented down the line if no one negotiates and decides to kind of pull back on this shit.
Of
They're playing chicken with each other.
Vietnam did get a reprieve, so Nintendo are basically going to spend the next 90 days trying to get as many Switch 2s into the US from Vietnam as is humanly possible.
Right.
But in the worst case, analysts at DFC Intelligence are suggesting that Nintendo may not raise the price, but what they may end up doing is lowering the volume shipped in order to lower their risk in that market. Keep that in mind for later when we'll talk about the kind of shocking impact that could have on sales. And of course, if you're worried...
So we're going to go back to COVID days where you have no supply and high demand. That's probably what we're going to see here. So right now they're shipping ahead of time as many as they possibly can. We've seen this in other markets too. It's happening not just in the games industry. It's happening, like I said, in vehicle purchases and everything else, where a lot of people move their purchases up and a lot of shipping is happening back and forth pre-tariffs. So a lot of vehicles are coming over, parts are coming over and everything in a rush to beat the tariffs being implemented. And then customers are buying this shit in droves right now because say you were waiting 2 months to make a purchase. Well, now you're going to make it this month instead of waiting 2 more months because you don't want the tariffs to impact your purchase price. So that's going to happen. Same with the Switch. They're getting all this shit over. And now this isn't launching yet, but Nintendo's trying to beat the tariff prices, get everything over the border before the tariffs come in. And then I guess they're saying once the tariffs actually happen, they're going to do a trickle of shipments to deal with the tariffs. And then hopefully they'll come down eventually and then they'll start regularly shipping them over again.
About scalping.
Apple with plane loads of phones. Yep, Apple's doing it too. You'll see it with all the companies are doing it right now. Everyone's shipping a ton of stuff over.
Yeah, you really should be if you're in America. That would suggest that anyone wants to buy the console. And if you'd look online, you'd certainly think, wow, nobody wants a Switch too. I don't think that's the case, but the backlash is fairly real, and in many cases, it's actually quite fair. It's fair to say Nintendo have not had a backlash like this since the 3DS in 2011, and at the time, that was treated as a fairly monumental event, right, where they basically had to betray their initial purchasers. So doing some sort of price cut after launch for the Switch 2 would be similarly brutal, right? If launch people, because of tariffs, had to pay a humongous amount for the console, then the tariffs go away, other people get it for cheap. Yes, that would feel bad. Even if it wasn't their fault, it would be a massive PR issue for Nintendo. But here's the thing, even without tariffs, people are saying that this console is too expensive. Not only the console, also the games. And really, they're not wrong. For many people, justifying $450 and then $80 for a game is...
That was the big one. $450 to me is still not bad. Now, Nintendo has always been... The thing about Nintendo is it's not typically gamers' primary console, right? A lot of people buy a Nintendo Switch as a secondary item, right? You got a PC and a Switch, or you got an Xbox or a PlayStation and a Switch. Like, it's always been that secondary thing because people want access to, all the Nintendo titles. It's a fun thing, and that's how my house works too. It's always been that secondary console. So Nintendo has never been able to charge the Xbox or PlayStation price typically because they just don't offer the same things for a hardcore gamer, right? And Nintendo also caters to a lot of kids, so that's something you're charging a big amount for a kid who's going to play it. But that price was one issue. But then the $80 game price came in, and I was watching this thing live, and the chat fucking went off. You saw it earlier. That was a big deal. So game prices rising, it's been something the industry's been talking about outside of tariffs. It's a digital good anyway, so that shouldn't really be affected by tariffs as of yet. I'm sure they're contemplating stuff like that. But right now, digital goods shouldn't be affected. So there's no excuse for an $80 price. That is not a tariff-based price. That is a price that they're trying to charge at a baseline. So that's something that the industry keeps trying to do, and it's hopefully the gamers keep fighting back against it and not being willing to pay it, and they won't be able to do it.
Really goddamn hard. Now, if you go into the data, right, this is Statista data for the US, it suggests that over the last 7 years, you would have been taking home between 0.7 to 16.8% more than you were whenever the Switch launched. Obviously, there's a very high range there. It likely will be somewhere in the middle for you. Big picture, people are not feeling like wages are keeping up with inflation, and there are a lot of costs these days. That absolutely makes a Switch 2 sting. But regardless of any increase, it feels like you buy less. In our last video on the topic, as an example, we pointed out that the richest 10% of the US population is currently paying for 50% of consumer spending.
That's wild.
That is quite the stat. So between inflation, the last recession, and a lot of other economic factors, the majority of people do seem to have less buying power. So when Nintendo appears and says, hello, you should pay $80 for the new Mario Kart, 33% more than for the last Mario Kart, that will hurt for people to hear. On an emotional level, it will feel like a bit of a betrayal. Quite literally, it will feel like they are being left behind by the economy broadly, and in this case, Nintendo specifically. And to the majority of people, that increase could be the choice between groceries and a video game in some cases.
Seriously.
That's pretty rough.
That's what's going to happen. If these prices keep going up, tariffs or not, what's going to happen is consumers are just going to buy less, right? People will still buy Mario Kart maybe, but then they won't buy Super Smash Brothers or whatever it is. People are going to have to make choices. They're going to buy the $90 in-game WoW store mount, but they're not going to buy The Witcher 4. You know, it's just going to come down to people being more frugal with their money and making more, I guess, nuanced or thought-through decisions, right? Instead of buying 4 games or 5 games in a year, you're only going to buy 2. That's what's going to happen. So the games industry is going to choke each other out, and unfortunately, that's going to lead to a lot of companies probably shutting doors.
And it's not just in the US. Even in Japan, there was actually pushback. Regional analysts, like one we often go to, Dr. Serkan Toto, pointed out that the cost of games had gone up by 52%. That's really goddamn big. That's surprising even to me. So even the region-locked console pricing could not balance that out. And if you weren't in the loop, basically, the Japanese Nintendo Switch 2 is way cheaper, but to compensate for that, it's region-locked to Japan. That was supposed to make it make sense for the Japanese economy, but even in Japan, they're not particularly thrilled. But to temper that ever so slightly, I do have a really interesting little tidbit. This was pointed out by Automation, where basically that conversation about the rising cost of games, that's been a little bit impacted by the relative cost of gacha games, right? So apparently that is absolutely surging up, especially for parents wanting a game for their kids.
That's the thing too, right? Like, okay, you're going to charge more on the front end for the games, but are you also going to add in microtransactions like you currently are? Because right now the gaming industry, the reason why it hasn't completely fallen apart, because it hasn't kept up with inflation the way everything else has, it hasn't fallen apart though, is because they're making so much more money on the back end of the game rather than at the initial game sale. And it's kind of like this, I don't know what you would call it, like this unspoken truce between gamers and the game devs, is that, okay, don't raise the game price, give us microtransactions, we'll accept that as long as everything kind of stays level with the initial purchase price, and we'll give you some extra money on the back end. If they're going to raise the price of games, like if Mario Kart's $80, and then I got to buy different tracks after, you know, with microtransactions, like I want Rainbow Roads and I got to pay extra money or something like that, or a cool skin or whatever, that's fucked up. That now you're double dipping, and that's where you're going to see problems. And a lot of people, J-Mall, will do like what you're doing. They're not going to buy the big dev games. They're just going to buy the cheaper stuff that gives them the same flavor.
But anyway, the core point is cost of games going up, cost of the gaming hobby is going up. This is happening with Nintendo. It's a justifiable worry. Prices are up, wages broadly are not, and now a moat is being placed around your hobby. You can't go to another castle with better performance and graphics here because, well, it's Nintendo. A lot of people are saying, wow, just buy a Steam Deck. I think it's fair to say that those are different audiences.
It is
for
a
a lot
different
of people,
audience.
they are essentially being...
Nintendo is an IP king, right? You want to play Donkey Kong, you want to play Mario, you want to play Mario Party, like all that stuff, it's the IP. That's what Nintendo charges for. You want to play Zelda, like these are things that you can only play on a Switch. I don't want to hear about your fucking jailbroken PC, you know, side PC or your whatever else you got going down. This is the only way you can play these games. So people who love these franchises, kids specifically too, and even people like my wife, this is the only kind of game she cares about. She wants to play Mario Party on the TV behind me as a family. Like we do that sometimes. That kind of stuff is only achievable through Nintendo. So yeah, they can charge a bit of a premium because they do hold really good IPs.
Being told that you can't play anymore. And Nintendo's response to that concern reminds me of the Xbox One and the internet requirement. Here's the big quote. We recognize there are some people who may not be able to afford the Switch 2's price point. That's why we wanted to make the other Switch platforms available. This was from Doug Bowser talking to CBC. It really does appear to be all part of the business plan. And some people have compared this to the very disastrous Xbox One launch where CEO, Don Matrick,
The
one of
always
the
on
legends of gaming, it's
version
fair
of
to
it.
say, told the press that if someone didn't want the always online Xbox, they could just go and purchase an Xbox 360. So
Right.
that was not great PR for him. In this case, though, it's Doug Bowser simply acknowledging market trends. Because, yeah, the economy's kind of different now. Console generations, in a way, are less real. There's less of a hard definition. People can't afford to move and often don't see the point of moving without meaningful exclusives existing. And a
Right.
factoid to sort of prove that is that we're only just starting to see PS5 sales overtake the PS4 proportionately over the last few months. So that is
That's
not
crazy.
humongous sector-wide growth, especially because PS5 and PS4 are the dominant thing, and Microsoft's position in the market's kind of slumped. It's kind of rough, actually. And what it shows is that
Well, Microsoft really cares about Game Pass. They don't give a shit about console sales anymore. That's the truth. They're making all their money on Game Pass, and Game Pass is popping off. It's doing great.
last generation of consoles lasted a long time into the current generation, and a lot of those big first-party games, well, they still shipped in the PS4 for like 2 years into this gen. In fact, PlayStation aren't going to stop PS Plus benefits for PS4 games until January 2026. It's kind of wild.
Wow.
For the third parties, the biggest games like Call of Duty
If I had to bet, I'd say they're going to extend that date too. I bet you it's not going to happen in January. We'll see.
still support the PS4 and the Xbox One, which, again, mind-boggling to me, but it does make financial sense. That's the consoles that people own. You can't not sell games on old consoles when those games these days cost so much money to make, and there's a big install base who will actually buy them. And what that means for the people who sell consoles is now they've actually got to play really quite the long game. The prior generation cannot just be abandoned in the way that it was, and that means Nintendo need to make it clear to people that the Switch 2 games are not just Switch 1 games, despite there being backward compatibility. There has got to be a strong perception of value to draw people forward, and partially that's going to be exclusive games that will stay exclusive, but it's also about making those games seem more valuable.
Yeah.
And that's why we've got to talk about perception. Speaking to Gene Park at the Washington Post, Doug Bowser confirmed that, as an example, the $70 benchmark is for a game like Donkey Kong Bonanza, and that will be most premium games. He said, though, there will be, quote, variable pricing across the line. And what they'll be doing is considering the development of the game and the expectancy that that game will give people long-term value.
Okay, so not all games are going to be at the higher price. So $70 is still an increase, though. But they're trying to say that it's based on dev time and input into the game.
And
That's
then
how they're
they
gonna
will
try to
price
price it.
accordingly, which basically means Mario Kart's going to be $80. If it's a sort of game that will become like a cultural institution that you'll be playing for a decade, it's going to cost $80.
Yeah.
He says that otherwise they'll monitor audience trends to see what the future will look like, which, to be honest, implicitly sounds like them saying, if not enough people buy the $80 version, we won't do it again. But it's probably also him saying, if enough people buy the $80 version, we'll probably do it again.
They're going to test the market. That's what this is. It's a market test. So again, speak with your wallet. That's the only way you can really vote on this stuff. So if you want to buy Mario Kart at launch at the $80 price, you're telling Nintendo, yeah, I'm willing to pay that much for a game. Now, and if you are, that's okay. Nothing against you. It's your money. You spend it how you want it. You want to use it on Mario Kart 64 or whatever this is? Yeah, do it. And
So
if
basically-
you don't. And that'll be a message to Nintendo. And if enough people don't, then yeah, I'm sure we'll see a discounted price.
You have to see, but you can be damn sure that broadly, if the industry can nudge those prices up, yeah, of course they will. We
They
saw
will,
the whole
yeah.
discussion about GTA and that. But still, to a lot of people, a $60 game is just as out of reach as, say, an $80 game these days, which is something that's actually built into
true.
Nintendo's plan. What they say they're hoping for, right, is inelastic demand for their products that basically means, well, they can justify that price. So that is the concept that regardless of the price, the quality of their product will ensure a consistent audience. And this is not a new concept for Nintendo. Their whole idea is that their console should be sold at a profit. Their games should be profitable. And we can see that perfectly encapsulated in one game. And it's one game that has sparked a lot of pushback. And that is
Switch game?
Nintendo Switch Welcome Tour. Because that welcome cost you $10.
No way.
Nintendo's Bill Trinity.
Wait, is this really $10? I thought this was going to be for free, kind of like, wasn't the PlayStation, what the hell was that game called? It came with the PlayStation 5, didn't it? Where it had like the little robot guy and you run around and do all that. Didn't it win like Game of the Year? That's freaking done. So this is a tour of your Nintendo Switch that'll cost you $10. Who the hell's going to pay that?
Cost you $10. Now, Nintendo's Bill
This should
Trinen
just come with the
argued
console.
that, quote, with the amount of care and work that they put in, they think it's a fair price for a minigame collection that also explains the details of the console. Of course, everyone, me included, we all just look at Astro's Playroom and we kind of say, what the fuck, guys?
This is what I was talking about, Astro's Playroom. I got that to Switch. The PlayStation. My son played this for hours. He loved this game, and it just came with the console. So what the hell's Nintendo doing charging $10? Now, they could say it's a good value, but again, the customer will determine whether or not it's a good value.
Or say Wii Sports, and based on both those two examples and the sheer fact that this is basically a thing that demos the console's features, that it should sort of be bundled with your console as a general thing. But here's the thing, Nintendo actually never really thought like that. We learned from Reggie Fils-Aimé's autobiography that both Iwata and Miyamoto had to be convinced over a period of months to give Wii Sports away for free. Which is kind of wild.
But it was a good move.
Quote, the ever-present smile and impish squint of Mr. Miyamoto's eyes were gone. Quote, neither of you understands the challenges of creating software that people love to play. This is something we constantly push ourselves to do. We do not give away our software. It's a fun quote. I can absolutely see where Miyamoto's coming from with that, but from a sheer marketing and cultural heft perspective, I think it's fair to say that Wii Sports being there on every Wii was fairly pivotal to its success.
I agree.
They, though, may argue that that's just me doing a backwards rationalization.
I know people who bought the Wii for this. This is why they bought the Wii. I don't even know if they purchased any other games, but there were people who didn't play consoles, but they said, "Oh, this is like a workout. I'm gonna buy the Wii." And basically, they thought, I'm going to buy Wii Sports. And then they purchased the Wii to get Wii Sports. That was it. A lot of people I know that just bought that console and never bought anything else, just used it for Wii Sports. This was a good move on their part.
If it did go the other way, and let's just say Wii Sports cost $20, maybe it would have been just as much of a cultural juggernaut, and people also would have bought it, thus netting Nintendo quite a bit more money. So Nintendo in this case are charging $80 because, quite frankly, they think they can. And right now, very many signs do actually point to them being right. Sometimes data tells a more interesting story than you'd expect. This is one of those cases. So according to VentureBeat, analyst firm DFC downgraded their Switch sales forecast over time. Now, remember, that's not because they're not expecting people to buy the console if, say, they're given the chance. It's because they're expecting Nintendo to ship fewer consoles. Now, they've downgraded from 17 million to 15 million sold.
To this realm.
Dasta, thank you for the follow, man. Welcome to our Scourge. Yeah, here's the thing. If you're going to have less consoles out there, companies got to make money. They got to pull as much profit as they possibly can. So when you got less people buying it, less of them being sold, you're going to have to charge more to make money, to make more money. Basically, you're milking your whales for everything they're worth.
Which, by the way, would still make it the fastest-selling games console ever, especially at launch, where basically it seems
15 million, that's a lot of units.
Kind of baked into people's expectations that the dedicated audience for the Switch will likely see Nintendo through, but that is assuming there are no further tariffs or price changes. Obviously, there could be chaos, and don't worry, we will be doing, and we're working on it right now, a full sort of deep dive impact on tariffs, impact to the game industry, all of that in a video that's less specific to Nintendo. But essentially, from our survey of the field, most analysts are assuming that unless something really drastic happens, the Switch 2 will not have a price increase. In fact, DFC, in their estimates before the price reveal, they were estimating $500 for the Switch. So market expectations were that this would have been more of a premium thing. Basically, the thought there is anything more than $500 would have simply been too much, and it would have snapped the inelastic demand.
Yeah.
But it's Nintendo. They have got strong inelastic demand. And they're in a very unique position, because on the one hand, they're launching a flagship at basically the worst possible moment. I mean, it really is a bad time. But also, they're Nintendo. They know that what they offer exclusively cannot be bought anywhere else.
Yeah, exactly.
The people who will say, buy a ROG Ally. That's, yes, a handheld game console, but it's not direct.
It's not Nintendo. It's not Nintendo. That's what Nintendo's selling you. They're not selling you the most powerful graphics card in the world or the best handheld in the world. They're selling you their IP. That's why you're buying it.
People who will say, buy a ROG Ally. That's, yes, a handheld game console, but it's not direct competition when you
Sam
think
is a
about
Trump
who
boy.
Nintendo actually sells to and what their audience is. They have got one of the strongest, maybe the
realist.
strongest moats in the entire industry, and they're thinking in the long term. So here's the thing. Nintendo can't raise your wages, but not raising game prices right now would effectively be reducing their game's value in their eyes, right? So if they kept their game prices down to try and meet the economic problems of the day right now, they would seem to themselves to be setting up for a worse long-term situation. Instead, what they're doing here is setting their plan out for the future, and what they want to do is bank on a very deeply invested audience that will get them started. They think that their sales will be fine based on what they can actually ship, and that will be a strong enough install base, but importantly for them, still one that is profitable. Which essentially means they're planning for diehards right now, and then for a healthier market to follow afterward, where all the rest of that demand will really come online and people will be able to buy the console. We will obviously, though, have to see how well that plays out. What's interesting to me is this is Nintendo trying to do this, and whenever they say $80 for Mario Kart, they can basically get away with it.
I expected GTA to be the one that tried to break the price gap and tried to raise the prices on average, and they still might. GTA still might come out and be $100. I don't know if I expected it from Nintendo, but they're doing it.
Not be happy.
At least try.
You may not be happy, but it's fucking Mario Kart. Where else are you going to get Mario Kart? Are you really going to go and play
the IP.
like flipping Crash Team Racing or some other kart game? No, you're not, right? So they think they can get away with it. There are few companies who can do that. Take-Two, I think, could do it with the next GTA, but it is very interesting.
It's funny, probably my second favorite like Mario Kart-esque game also came from Nintendo, Diddy Kong Racing. Diddy Kong Racing was like the only kart-esque game that I enjoyed playing besides Mario Kart.
Saw the price increase
both
up
Nintendo
to $69.99. What did we see play out in the market? There are some games who, well, could actually get away with that, right? People were willing to buy. May not have been happy, but they did buy. But in those cases where a game extra did not justify its AAA price tag, I mean, Redfall's probably a good example, we saw seemingly extra hard punishment. So yeah, Nintendo could nudge up those prices. Take-Two will probably follow along, but anyone else who follows along, well, they better make sure they have the goods, because if they don't, it will be a very expensive mistake.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, what else? Where else could you get Pokemon? You could play Pal World. Yeah, but that's the thing. You're always going to play some kind of knockoff version. You want the OG, you want the real IP, you want to play the original franchises, and honestly, let's be honest, the best versions of these games, yeah, you're going to have to play the Nintendo version. You're going to have to get the Nintendo console to play them. So Nintendo knows this. They know they got a corner in their IP. They know they've got the titles that people want to play.
Time worrying about a console that you can't get carried on and start focusing on how you will cause more wipes and destroy more hopes of players getting here.
This is not true. It's fake news.
You can't blame the
fake
other
news.
tank, the other DPS or the other healers. Maybe you need to review the lack of skillful actions by the degenerate bald DK who refuse to drop each and every raid.
Why I gotta bring my hair into it?
DK has wiped the raids on numerous occasions and should be deleted from existence. Time to play a healer.
Okay, yeah, tariffs bad. Your PC parts are going to be more expensive, most likely. So be careful with that. That's how it affects WoW. And we'll tie the video in with that unnecessary comment there from Lano. Thank you for watching.